Welcome to the Animal Aspirations podcast. In this episode, we speak to two clinicians at the QMHA, the RVC Teaching Hospital. We talk about their journey through internships and residencies and the societal perceptions of the veterinary profession in ethnic minority communities. Not everyone is fortunate enough to have had diversity organisations working towards visibility within the profession during their student days. And in this episode, we discuss the importance of diversity and inclusion work and why these guests want to get involved now. I really hope you enjoy. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. Would you like to introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm Serena. I'm a veterinary ophthalmologist. I work at the QMHA at the RVC.
Hi, I'm Anne. I also work at the RVC in the QMHA, and I am a veterinary cardiologist.
Lovely. Okay, so the first question I want to ask you is, what was your journey into your current job? How did you get to where you are?
I'll start. So, where do I start, I guess? From the very beginning or into specialty? From the beginning?
So, story time.
So I guess, in some ways, I guess my route into veterinary was quite conventional because I went straight from sixth form to university. But it was actually that sort of transition maybe wasn't in some ways very typical because of my background. So I wasn't from a farming background, which a lot of the vet students in my year were. I didn't even have any pets at home, which was a bit unusual. Although I did a lot of work experience prior to getting into vet school, I think in a lot of ways I wasn't sort of a typical candidate that way. And certainly, one of the reasons why we didn't have pets at home was because at that time, and I think still now in large swathes of the Indian community, it's just not a very typical thing to have a pet. It's kind of a bit of an unusual concept. I think more and more Indian families are starting to get pets, but there's very much a kind of feel of, animals are outside and they work and they have jobs, and the idea of an animal as a friend is still a little bit unusual within the Indian community. So I guess that was a challenge that I faced within my family. I suppose they were not super keen on me doing veterinary. And actually, I think the moment when that changed was when I went to Vet 6, which I'm not sure if it's still running. It's a conference at Nottingham Uni for sixth formers that want to do veterinary, and it was really great, a really helpful conference. And my dad came along to it and ended up sitting in on some of the lectures and came away from it saying, yeah, I think she's going to be okay. I think this is an all right choice. And yeah, if this is what you want to do, then that's fine. And I think from then on, both my parents were kind of a bit more on board. And they've been very, very supportive since, which is fantastic. So yeah, I went to vet school. It was very difficult to get an offer, even with, I think, something like 10 A stars at GCSE and my 4 A's at AS level, and my grade 8 piano and my grade 8 cello and all the things, and the Duke of Ed gold and blah, blah, blah. It was still very, very difficult to get an offer. I only got one offer from Bristol and felt very fortunate to get that, because I had a couple of friends that were of similar caliber candidates that didn't get it the first time round. And I was fully expecting not to have an offer. I was prepared for that, but was fortunate. Got into Bristol, went to Bristol, loved it. Went into general practice for a few years. Went to Australia for a year to work on a working holiday visa, which I think was one of the best decisions I've ever made, and I will recommend it to any vet out there who's thinking about it. Just do it, just go. Honestly, one of the best years of my life. Came back, did a rotating internship at the RVC, which was, if the year in Australia was one of the best years of my life, I would say that my internship year was probably one of the best years of my career. I just absolutely loved it. And it really opened my eyes as to what other options I had apart from general practice clinical work. And that was really a real revelation for me. And then following that basically was my journey into specialism. So I ended up doing another internship just in ophthalmology, which was my area of interest, which is not necessarily required to do 2 internships, but it's not uncommon either. And then did my residency training in ophthalmology, which was a little bit tumultuous, to say the least, but got to the end of it, which was good. And then came back to the RVC to work as a clinician, and that's where I am now, waiting to sit my final exams. Yeah, so hopefully that'll go okay. We'll have to see. Keep fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. No, I'm sure you'll do amazing. I'm sure you'll do amazing.
Yeah, I guess it's my turn. I think there's going to be things that are quite similar to Serena's journey, but mine is obviously going to be a bit different, as you can tell from my accent. I'm not British. I'm from the States. I'm from New York City. And I think, you know, when people ask you, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? Like, when I was little, I always wanted to be a vet, but I don't actually know why, but I kind of stuck with it. Like, I was always like, I wanted to be a vet. The funny thing in growing up in New York City, that's like a whole nother episode, what it's like to grow up in New York City. I think you could do an episode about that and like growing up in London too, because I think it's completely different from growing up in other places. But I had a lot of opportunities in high school, but they were pushing you more into going into medicine, research, law. Of course, in New York, you know, everyone is going to become lawyers. I think probably like a quarter of my high school, they're probably lawyers now. But and I was the only person that wanted to be a vet, and I wasn't really sure how to go down that route. So it's interesting when I hear about the journey of, you know, British people or British students, in that you kind of have to pick like what you want to do for the rest of your life, like so early. And I think that's really hard, because even though I knew I wanted to be a vet, I don't think I really knew what it meant to be a vet or what are the options and things like that. And I was doing like a research thing during high school, and I asked my mentor, I was like, I want to be a vet, but what am I supposed to do? Like, how do I become a vet? And she was like, well, it would make a lot of sense to go to university with a vet school. And I was like, oh, that's genius. So, you know, in the States, there's actually not that many vet schools. I mean, there's more than in the UK, obviously, but our country is much, much bigger, and many people want to become vets. It's super competitive, as it is here as well. And so, you know, I chose to go to a state that I've never been to. And actually, I had no idea where it was on the map. It's Purdue University in Indiana. It's in the Midwest. I'm from New York City. So when you talk to people from either New York City or California, we kind of only know the coast. We don't know what's going on in the middle. So I was like, okay, well, I'll just go. I applied to a few places and I got into a few places, but I was like, okay, well, I'll check out Purdue and see how things are at that university. And in the States, you go through undergrad. So you do 4 years, you get your bachelor's, then you go into like medical school or vet school or law school or whatever. And so when I did my undergrad at Purdue, and you know, I was trying to get some experience, trying to get my foot in the door in the vet school. And they do encourage you to apply your 3rd year. So if there's any, you know, people listening to this that are still in undergrad thinking about vet school, you can apply before you finish your bachelor's. And somehow I got in. And so I started vet school after 3 years of undergrad, and that was 4 years. When I started vet school, believe it or not, I was like, oh, I want to be a surgeon, because, you know, I'm sure for many people, when you think, oh, surgeons, that's so cool. You see like the human surgeons on TV and you're like, oh, they're so cool. Went through vet school, realized, no, I don't like surgery. And my mentor, he is a cardiologist and just one of the nicest people. And, you know, that's how you get influenced. I think when you're in vet school, like all of your mentors and people you speak to, they tell you about how awesome their jobs are. That's how you start to be like, oh, maybe I want to do that when I grow up. And so, yeah, Dr. Green was amazing. He kind of helped me through the process of, getting an internship and things like that. Serena says internship was the best year of her life, or career, worst year of my life.
No.
It's internship. I went to Louisiana State University. I loved the year. I learned so much. So in the States, if you want to specialize, they typically discourage you into going to general practice, but we are a little bit older than, British students. So I think by the time I graduated, I might have been like 25 or 26 or something like that. Because we do the bachelor's before, and I think I was the youngest one because I finished my undergrad a little bit earlier. And yeah, it was a terrible year. 100-hour weeks, probably worked 72 hours in a row, multiple times. I think I had one day off, which we weren't really allowed to take it off anyway, but I was very, very ill. And yeah, but everybody goes through that in the States in terms of internship. So my story wasn't any different from others. But like Serena, I didn't, or I don't know if you didn't get a residency or you wanted to do an internship, but I didn't get a residency right away. And so I did a couple of other things. And so I did a few research experiences. One of them, I actually went to Japan. I'm Japanese American, but I never lived in Japan. I was born and raised in New York City, so it was such a great opportunity to live somewhere that's technically home. People look like me, but I was definitely different. So it was really interesting to go through that type of experience. And I worked at the vet school there, which was really interesting. I had such a great time. And while I was working there, I came with the team there to the RVC for an open heart surgery procedure. A very rich owner paid for all of us to come and do this heart surgery. And that's where I met the RVC team. And I thought this would be such an amazing place to do my residency. My mentors at the RVC are absolutely amazing. And somehow I got the residency. And so I did that, and that was 3 years. Took my exams, and now I work here. So that's my long journey, which has been, ups and downs.
That's really interesting. No, I enjoyed it. Yeah, but that's a very long journey, but you made it.
13 years of school.
That's a long journey, but you made it. I wanted to ask, because you kind of alluded to it, but what is like veterinary career or profession like represented like in your cultures? Is it like something that your families were supportive of or like understood first time? Like,
so as an American, vet school is known to be, a very respected place to go. Veterinarians are highly respected. There's just this idea that, it's harder than medical school to get into and stuff like that. So, for my immediate family, it was like, well, good luck, if you could even get in. So, that was fine. But certainly my relatives in Japan, I'm pretty sure vet school is difficult to get into in Japan as well. But the usual, like, why don't you go to medical school? You probably could have gotten into medical school. Oh, the neighbor used to do like veterinary medicine. He didn't even go to vet school. Like, it just things like that. And I don't think people really understand how hard it is to get into vet school, or how hard it is to graduate from vet school. So, I they're not that rude about it, but I could tell that I was disappointing some of my relatives in Japan. How about you, Serena?
Very, very similar, I think, hearing your story, Anne. Like, the same in the UK. I think in general, in amongst I suppose, the part of the community that go to university and are academic and so forth, it's recognized that veterinary school is difficult to get into. There's a long running joke about most doctors being failed vets, which obviously isn't true, but it's kind of it just demonstrates that it's very, very competitive, and it's a profession that I think has a reasonable amount of respect and so forth within society, akin to, I would say, doctors and dentists and that kind of thing. But within the Indian community, even the Indian community within the UK, or at least the Indian community within Northern Ireland, because that's where I grew up, which is much, much smaller than the Indian community in England. And I think a little bit different as well. They've just, they've sort of stayed in this very small, quite insular group. I mean, of course, they've integrated well into the community, but as I think with a lot of immigrant families and communities, they kind of take all the values and culture from when they left India, and then when they come over, it sometimes just kind of stays in that place. And then in India, people are kind of moving forward and developing and so forth, and this small community in their desire to kind of maintain their values and their culture, sometimes I think they struggle to kind of move forward a little bit. So certainly within the Indian community within Northern Ireland, I mean, they're all wonderful supportive families, but I think my parents found it a little bit of a strange choice for me, and certainly no one that we knew was a vet. I think we knew one family that had a dog, and it was kind of more like a guard dog. The dog had a job. It wasn't just a friend. This sort of concept of pets as friends is a bit I think they found it difficult to understand. And I, like Anne, just had this sort of feeling from a very young age of just wanting to be a vet. I just knew that I wanted to work with animals. I was drawn to them, and I couldn't really explain it. And I think my parents were a bit confused, and I think they were worried as well, because they didn't know anything about the profession, and we hadn't come across vets in our day-to-day life. They were just concerned. And with both of them being doctors, obviously, I think they struggled to fathom why I just wasn't doing medicine. Why was I insisting on doing medicine for animals and not just medicine for humans? So it was a bit difficult, I think, for them to understand it, and but it was all born of sort of concern, and a bit of fear, I suppose. But as I said before, that conference was a bit of an unexpected sort of watershed moment, I think, for my dad. And then he managed to kind of talk my mum around. And I think they slowly realized that I just wasn't going to be moved either. I kind of, from the age of 7 till 17, I was still like, I want to be a vet. I want to be a vet. I want to be a vet. And one thing they did, actually, they suggested that I do some work experience in other jobs just to see if there's something that I hadn't considered. So I kind of humored them, and I did a bit of work experience with a law firm and with a dentist and in a hospital and in a GP practice, and at the end I was still like, yeah, I still want to do veterinary. And they were like, all right then. So as I said before, they've been incredibly supportive since then, but there have been a few light-hearted jokes made at my expense from extended family in India, I must say. But it's all taken in jest, and it's not something that bothers me in particular, but I do recognize it as an additional challenge that a lot of teenagers from Asian families may face in their journey to becoming a vet and seeing themselves as potential members of this profession. I think is something that's probably improving, but could still be a little bit of a challenge.
And I think you didn't mention this, but it just came to my mind when you were saying this, but do you think it has to do with, our family's concern in terms of our salaries? Because I think that's definitely what it is in the States. I mean, if you're like a human doctor, actually don't know, but I'm pretty sure you could get up to close to $1 million a year. Like an anesthesiologist, I think they kind of make a lot of money. Of course, plastic surgeons, dermatologists, I feel like that's kind of the professions in the medical field that tend to make a lot of money. But I think a lot of people know that vets don't make as much money. And so it's like, you're going to go to all this school, you're going to spend, in the States, vet school is extremely expensive. And you're going to spend all this money and you're going to make, not that much money. So I think that's the biggest concern for my family when I was like, I want to be a vet. So I don't know if it's I don't know, do doctors make a lot more here than vets? I don't know, but definitely is the case in the States.
Yeah, I think it was a similar, that was part of the concern. Sorry to interrupt you there, Anne. I thought you'd reach in. Yeah, I think that was part of my parents' concern. To be fair, we didn't really know very much about vet salaries. It wasn't really until I started working as a vet that I realized how limited they are. And interestingly, my sister, who's 3 years younger than me, trained as a doctor, as an anaesthetist, funnily enough. And so and I guess, and we're very sort of open in our family about salary and that kind of thing. And seeing how the two of us have progressed over the last kind of 10 years, there's a massive discrepancy. But interestingly, now that I think we've both kind of reached an equivalent stage. So she's now got a consultant's position as an anaesthetist, and as a staff clinician at the RVC, and hopefully soon to become a lecturer. We're not too far off each other. So that's maybe a little bit of a difference. But then maybe if she was in private healthcare, it would be different, I guess. But she works for the NHS, so now we're not too bad. But I lost out financially massively during residency and internship training. Yeah, it was quite a big financial blow. You can't spend too much time thinking about the amount of money that you lost.
Yeah, same.
That's really interesting. In the UK, like because obviously it's such a competitive course, you might not get in the first time, and I have also friends who didn't get in the first time. So you can do like an undergraduate course, which you have to do in the US. So if you do the postgraduate course in the UK, like normally there's like student finance, so they'll like fund for you to do your undergraduate course, but they don't fund for you to do your postgraduate course. So there are a lot of people in my year group and in the course in general who've like have done like a 3 or 4 year degree and then are now doing like veterinary as a postgraduate degree, have to pay for it, and then now going out into doing like residencies, and then are still fine. Because I do think maybe one of the deterrents of the profession is how, like, if you can't supply the funds yourself, then who's going to do it for you? That's a big thing that I think stops a lot of people from applying or considering it as one of their options, because they're like, I don't have the money to be able to do that. And there definitely is getting better. I know that there are a lot more scholarship programs and stuff like that which are being implemented, but you're right, like finances is a big, I think, like a not an issue, but like some considering point, something that you have to consider. So that's a very interesting point. I wanted to talk about, you kind of alluded to, but how your mentors who were above you like helped you in your decision of choosing what specialties you wanted to do. So do you feel like, as kind of like, did you have were they like your role models in your career role models? Because I feel like pre-vet school, like people, when they say role models of veterinary, there's only like a few specific, like like public figure names. You have like Noel Fitzpatrick and you have James Herriot. They're the people that you kind of assume people just look to when they say veterinary role models. So do you feel like you had like representation of like BAME role models like in veterinary that you can look to now? Or do you feel like that is something that you want to be for younger vets coming up through?
Yeah, I definitely didn't have any BAME role models within veterinary. I mean, no, nothing. I mean, nothing comes to mind. And I mean, I think for me, my age, I think Rolf Harris and Animal Hospital and David Grant at the RSPCA Harmsworth, they have a lot they've got a lot to do with it. And James Herriot as well. So, old white men were my role models for veterinary, before I got into the course. And I think it, I mean, I don't know why I was so tenacious about getting into veterinary, but I can only imagine that it's a bit unusual in some senses, because I mean, I saw absolutely zero representation. But do you know what? I think maybe part of that is because I grew up in Northern Ireland with this tiny Indian community. I didn't really see myself represented anywhere. I didn't really see myself represented on TV that much, certainly not on the Northern Irish channels, even at school, teachers, that kind of thing. Of course, I still found role models as I was growing up, but no one really that looked like me other than my parents. So I guess that was a challenge, but one I was kind of just not really aware of, because it had become normal for me. That was the community that I grew up in. But I think as I've got older, I think I've really realized the harm that can have, not seeing people like you on TV and in influential positions, and across a breadth of professions and jobs. And so for me, definitely, yes, I think, although it's a sort of struggle to kind of see myself as a role model, I guess that where my mind kind of shifted on that topic was when I was talking to my uncle. So my uncle works, he's the only member of the family who isn't a doctor, but he's a mathematician, so another stereotypical Asian occupation, and he works in a higher education facility as well, and he's also heavily, well, I say also, I'm not quite yet there, but he's heavily involved in diversity and inclusion and so forth in his university, and so I had been speaking to him for advice really on how I could try and get involved here and improve things for our students here and prospective students at the RVC. And he gave me a few ideas, and it was really helpful conversation. I kind of, had a whole list of stuff that I was really keen to do and get started. And it was really interesting because at the end of the conversation, he basically said, but Serena, don't forget that you're already doing a huge amount just by being you and by being there, and by being, a female person of color, in a position where you're teaching and guiding undergraduate vets, and you're in a specialist role, and that you're increasing visibility of people like you within the profession, and so don't get too kind of worried about having to do all this other extra stuff. If you can do it, then great, but just by virtue of being there, you're a role model as such. And so I think that really kind of hit home with me and made me feel a real sense of duty and responsibility. And that's definitely something that I'd like to kind of expand on and grow into during my career.
Yeah, I think I'm quite similar to Serena, except that during vet school, my mentor, I went to Purdue, which is a university that changed quite a bit when from the time that I started to now. And my mentor, the cardiologist I mentioned, he's Black, and just, even still, I saw him, I think last year, and he still remembers me and still a mentor. It's just so great to have that type of relationship. I guess 10 years after I graduated vet school. But when I started, we had a new Dean Reed, who committed. He said when he started, he's like, my commitment to diversity is real, and basically that's what he's been doing the whole time since he's been there. And I saw such a difference. So when I went in my class, we had, vet school is quite small, and well, it depends on which school, but my class was small. We had about 72, 73 people. And of that, there was my one friend who is Indian. There's two Black students, me, yeah, and that's it. And everyone else was Caucasian. And the year below me, there was, I think, like I want to say like 6 Asian people, like more Black students. And the year after it just got more and more, and kind of representing all these different backgrounds, which is so amazing to see. It wasn't the case, obviously, when I was going through the vet school, because we really didn't have diversity, especially with the specialists and our mentors. There really wasn't much, and I vaguely remember my mentor talking about, the difficult times. I mean, of course, he's not going to tell me too much, but I could tell that it was difficult for him, kind of going through the specialty route and just veterinary medicine and things like that, and living in Indiana. So, I think it was really hard for me because I didn't really see very many like Asian female specialists, and but I didn't really think about it too much. I think similar to Serena, you're just kind of used to it. Even growing up on TV or magazines, I never saw like Asian models and things. And then as I went to college and stuff, and you'd find like maybe an actress or a model, and you're like, oh, she's half Asian. That's great. So and then now, of course, there's I feel like we're represented in a better way. But I remember growing up and thinking, oh, things are changing, which is really great. But I think now there is more of us, but still not enough. And I think the thing that excited me most, to be completely honest, is Dan Chan. So Dan Chan, I found out, I don't know when I had this conversation with him, but he's difficult to catch, so you can't really have that many casual conversations with him. But I did have a casual conversation with him when we were on a work trip, and I found out that he is also from New York City, also from Queens, which is where I'm from. And he grew up in, he's obviously Chinese American. He grew up in an area in Queens that was fairly close to where I grew up. And our kind of education was fairly similar in terms of, where we went to high school and all those types of things. And, I was just like, oh my God, that's amazing. And he's, head of department. And, it's just so inspirational to see that as well. And I see him sending emails at 2 a.m., which he shouldn't be. But it's great to see someone that looks like me that is so successful. So he's definitely a role model.
I think you've brought up some interesting points, one of them being like visibly ethnic minority, and like being able to see that in each other. And even if you're not like it, like I feel like when I think of role models, I always think of someone that you're looking up to, or someone that's like below looking up to you. But it doesn't have to be like, you can be on the same level looking at each other, being like, I see you and you're doing well, and like you're inspiring me and you're inspiring other people. So that's a really interesting point that I think is in the veterinary profession, is kind of, because obviously it's such a small, like there's such a small network of people that there's, it's not as big as medicine, that being able to see other people doing well, like even with Animal Aspirations and all the other different organizations, we're all aiming to do the same thing, and like just being like, I see you, and like we're all doing the same thing, and we're making a difference. And another interesting thing you said is how from the start of your journey to now you've seen change. And I think that's really important to highlight, because I think it's really easy to be like, this is a list of stuff that we need to be doing, and we need to be making sure that this is happening and this is happening, and how can we increase, our statistics of how many, how can we increase outreach, which is, they have whole teams of widening participation programs to help influence those decisions and stuff. But I think change is long term, and it's not such an easy thing as being like, oh, we can change this and then we'll be okay. So I think the fact that in your journey you have seen change, although it's been a long time, is like also a good sign. Like even for me, speaking to you guys and being like, oh, you didn't have anyone in your year, or you had such few people, and me being like, oh, there's more people in my year, which is better. Like even though it's not much, like for me coming to vet school, like I remember my first day I walked to the lecture hall and I was like, right, cool. So there's no one here that looks like me, no one. And then I found friends and it was fine, and we have a group now. And there are definitely other people, and like I don't know what the year below me looks like because I haven't been able to go to campus because of COVID, so hopefully there's more people, but like seeing the difference between like your experience at starting vet school and like my experience at starting vet school, I don't know, I feel like it's kind of hopeful that things are progressing and are changing and that people want to be involved. I feel like a lot of the time people were always asking for these sorts of changes, but no one really cared or like wanted to do anything about it. Whereas now I feel like, well, like from the RVC, like my experience, like they're like, oh, like we're trying to fix this. Like we want to help you out. Like what can we do? Like we're listening to you, which is something that I've never really experienced with like from like an institution perspective. So I think it's quite interesting, but it's different hearing like your experiences and Mike and like thinking about my experience and how things are changing. So I think that's quite interesting.
Yeah, and I think what you guys are doing with Animal Aspirations is just so amazing. Like you need to do student-led change. I mean, when I was in vet school, myself and a few of my classmates, we started a chapter called Voice, which is similar to maybe Animal Aspirations, but basically it was just a way, and I would encourage you guys to do this too, but a way for everybody to learn about each other's cultures and through food. So we would all, make food from our culture or, basically anything. So one of my favorite places is New Orleans. And I tried to make jambalaya. Dr. Green is from New Orleans or Louisiana, and my mentor, and he was very kind when I made it, but I'm sure it didn't taste anything like a proper jambalaya. But I was just interested in like other cultures, other foods, and I think it's just important to spread that because you don't know everybody's background. Maybe they just don't know and they're afraid to be like, oh, like what kind of food do you guys eat, or like what kind of things do you guys do? And so just having a place where you're just sharing that information without making people feel like rude by asking, and what's that smell, that's a typical Asian food comments. And so yeah, I think food is such a great way to share our culture. So I would encourage you guys like Animal Aspirations to do that, although you guys are doing so much. So
yeah, it's really
great
interesting
job.
because I feel like a lot of when we talk about like inclusion and diversity and like widening participation programs, is very much focused on like the next generation, and it's very much like how can we make things better for the next people, but it's not so much focused on how can we make it better for the people who are currently doing it. It's not so much like how can we help each other out, how can we do so. So I do think that's a really interesting, like what can we do for current students now to like make things better for their experience, for the rest of their experience. So
yeah
I love that idea. I would be up for that as a foodie. Just go eat lots of amazing food all the time. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, that does. And I think because obviously, like if we're specifically talking at the RVC, it's like a smaller population in veterinary medicine, that there is even though there's such a small amount of us, I feel like everyone, like there's a good representation of different people. So I think that would be a really interesting to be able to like have food from lots of different cultures, even though we're all small, and like bond over food, because food is great. I think that's a really interesting way of helping it out. Yeah, I don't know, I just think the conversation of like role models is really difficult because obviously you have like mentors, which is more of like a professional relationship, and then like role models, which is just people that you in your like personal lives like look up to. So I guess like having a supportive family network is helpful with dealing with circumstances that you would have to deal with as a BAME person that other non-BAME people, non-visibly ethnic minorities would have to deal with. But do you think, I don't know, how can I phrase this question, like do you think that like the fact like your support network now and you trying to be role models, or just like you just living as your existence, like you said, Serena, like the fact that your existence is itself being a role model, do you think that's something that you think about consciously, like when you see other people that are like lower down than you and you're like I want to help them? Is that like a conscious decision, or is it just you're just, I don't know, it doesn't really make sense?
think it makes sense. I don't know about Serena, but I definitely think working at the RVC, I feel more like I want to help people because we have two Ts, we have RP2 students, and we have all these students that come through rotations. And I think for me, being one American, I feel like sometimes I have a special bond with American students as well. And, they might ask about my journey, and maybe if they're interested in internships and things like that, they'll approach me. So, I have a lot of random chats with students. And then also being Asian, I think it's always hard to approach people based on their race. But I think I never know, like when Serena and I were starting to talk, we were like, it's like, how do we approach it without sounding weird about it? So I think it's difficult, but we all go through the same thing. And so, might start off with like, oh, like, where are you from? Kind of thing. And then kind of go from there and find similarities and, have a conversation. And I think we just need more than being a role model. I think just being able to support each other, like me and Serena also together, but also of course with students, having someone that you can talk to about problems that you might have that other people might not understand. So I think in that way I want to be available for people to just be like, hey, because the RVC, you guys, there's so many of you. The classes are huge. I'm used to, like I said, my vet school is tiny. So we all knew about everybody's business, and like our teachers, we knew them all really well. So it was kind of like a family, although it feels a bit different here. And so, I think it's important to have opportunities to have conversations and build relationships, be able to support each other and us to support you guys with whatever you might be going through during your vet school and, vet career. So I think it's kind of automatic. It just comes with the job for me. I don't know about you, Serena. I'm sure it's similar, kind of forced into it.
Very similar. I think it's definitely something I'm a lot more conscious of. And I think than I ever have been. And I think part of that is certainly being at the RVC, and by being here, you're automatically in a kind of teachery, guidance-y, mentory kind of position. And so it kind of brings out a lot of that in you anyway. And I think the people that are attracted to work at the RVC already have that in them as something that is important to them, something that they want to do. I think specifically in terms of, sort of seeing myself as a positive role model for students who are of color and prospective students, I think that's something I've become a lot more conscious of recently as well. And for me, I think, as for a lot of people, I'm sure, obviously, for me, a big watershed moment was the Black Lives Matters movement, which obviously, really opened my eyes to the experience of Black people in a way that I'd never really thought of before. And then as a kind of side to that, it made me reflect on my own experiences with racism, and not that it's the same, of course, but it's sort of adjacent, I guess, and made me kind of confront my experiences with racism in a way that I had never really done before. And that was that whole experience, I think, for me was both kind of really enlightening, but also quite traumatic, in kind of really facing what happens in the world to Black people and other people of color. And I think initially I found it really quite distressing. But then after I kind of came to terms with that aspect of it, it just really lit a fire under me that this is something I really want to be actively involved in. And the RVC is a good place to do that. There are routes to do that. there are routes to be involved in diversity and equality and inclusion. There's the new racial equality task force group that was created in response to the BLM movement. And we've yet to see what their report is going to generate, but it's apparently quite ambitious and bold. So I'm very hopeful that will lead to real change. And of course, you guys, Animal Aspirations, I'm just, Anne said that there was, she had a similar group at her university, and I think that's really awesome. And certainly one of my first thoughts whenever Animal Aspirations kind of approached me and I kind of got to know what you guys were about was just like, I was just like in complete awe of it. I just thought, oh my God, I can't believe these students have just started this by themselves. And I'd never come across anything like that. And there was certainly nothing like that whenever I was a student. And it never would have entered my head to even start something like that. I guess I just didn't really feel like I had permission, or like I was allowed, or like it was important enough. And so I just thought it was really incredible that you guys have started that. And I think in that way, like we were sort of saying before about role models are not necessarily people who are above you. They can be people who are on the same level as you. I certainly see you guys as role models in how unapologetic you are, and brave and direct. And I just think it's fantastic. I think it's really, really fantastic. And I feel really honored to be involved. And even with Anne as well, our first conversations when we were working together was, in this area. And it felt really nice and very empowering to kind of meet someone else who had a similar experience and saw the RVC and wider society through a similar lens and wanted to change things as well. So yeah, it's definitely something I've become a lot more consciously aware of, and I think for many reasons, and certainly I'm hopeful that working at the RVC is a place where we can enact change.
Oh, when you were giving compliments to Animal Aspirations, I was like, oh my God,
It's totally true.
I just felt like I gotta go and message the team, like, guys, I don't know, you do stuff like with widening participation, Animal Aspirations or whatever, like ambassador role work. I don't know, sometimes you get kind of like, it's easy to forget like why you're doing stuff, and sometimes like, especially like being a student in veterinary, is like, it can be a lot to be like balancing studying and revising and like passing all the exams and doing well, as well as trying to do like outreach work and do that. But like sometimes like when you hear like nice comments and people recognizing your work and like the work of the organizations that you're working for, I think it really like puts into perspective and makes it worthwhile, like especially when like if any of the like kids that we work with like comes up to any one of us and they're like, oh, like you're so inspirational, you've like helped me out, I'm gonna help, like I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do that, or you've inspired me. I think it really does like put it more into perspective, like, oh, this is like bigger than me as a being. This is like, it's not just about me as a person, it's about me being a face of like change. And I think the three of us are all doing that, even though it's not like a conscious thing, because I do think sometimes, at least for me, it's, you sometimes feel like, oh, I don't know if I'm doing it right, but there is no right way, it's just you're doing your own way, and that's making a difference anyway. So thank you for this. I just wanted to ask finally, like, is there any quotes or like philosophies or stuff that has helped you in your career or your journey to like get to this far? Is there anything that you like stick with that has helped you?
You want to answer?
You should go.
I don't know. I mean, it's tricky, I guess. I mean, one of my kind of life philosophies, I guess, something that I always come back to, which in a way, I guess, has influenced my journey here, is but it's certainly something that's always felt really true to me, is just to live and let live. I think that's always felt very, very important to me. And I think the way that I interpret that is, that everyone's free to live their life and make their choices as they see fit, without judgment. And I guess the other side of it, I suppose, that's maybe more relevant to my journey in veterinary is that I try not to be kind of put off by what other people are doing. So, some people are extremely competitive, and of course I have a competitive streak, but people express it differently, and some people express it in a very aggressive way, and especially when you're dealing with competitive scenarios like getting into vet school, getting an internship, getting a residency, those are all quite competitive, and within that sort of group of people that are trying for that position, you can come across people who are quite aggressive, that do try and elbow their way into places and consciously or unconsciously try and put other people down in order to make themselves feel better. And for me, part of the kind of live and let live philosophy allows me to just kind of put my blinkers on in that kind of situation, just be like, well, okay, you do you. And this is my plan for how to get to a residency or how to get to be a specialist. And I'm just going to stick with that and try not to be put off by you. And, that's fine. And I'm just going to do this. And that seems to be working for me. So, I think that's probably the closest thing I have to a life philosophy. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's so interesting what you were saying, Serena, about like how competitive it was. I agree, cardio is quite competitive as well, but interestingly, and I don't know if this is because I have a different perspective, growing up in New York City, you can imagine how competitive generally life is. Even just getting on the bus, like, you better push your way in there or the bus is going to leave you, So everything is super competitive. And I remember when I went to Purdue, and I was like shoving my way into the bus, and everyone's like, why are you shoving your way into the bus? Like, the bus is going to wait. Like, everyone's going to be on the bus. And I'm like, oh yeah, like I'm just used to being like super competitive, like all the time. But that has calmed down quite a bit since I've left New York City. It's been a really long time.
But it was didn't mean to shame competitive.
no. But it's true. I really didn't like that side of me because some of it is unnecessary because, I think it's important to work together and get to the same goal. For cardiology, it was very competitive, but strangely enough, when I was looking at the application pool, because there's not a huge amount of like, everyone's so nice, everyone deserves it. Talking to the other people, they're so nice, and you're like, you know what, like if I don't get it, it's just because I didn't deserve it. You deserve it more. Like it was very strange because I thought it was going to be really competitive, people being nasty, but for me it really wasn't. It took me a few tries to get it, but I was like, I didn't get it because it just wasn't meant to be. And then I got the residency essentially of my dreams. It was the best residency I could have asked for. And so I'm always like, things happen for a reason. I guess that's kind of a quote, but I think for me, what I wanted to say was, let me think quote wise, never let anyone tell you you're not enough. I think it's so hard because comes with a competitive thing because, even just getting into vet school, many people don't get in the first time around. Some people will. For me, I got into vet school, but I didn't get a residency right away. I failed multiple times, but I finally got one. So you just have to keep trying. No one's going to tell you, no, you don't deserve a residency. No, you're not smart enough. Like I wasn't at the very top of my class. In the US, they rank you quite a bit. And in general, for cardiology, you kind of have to be at the very top. But I didn't let that get me down, and I said, well, I'm gonna make sure my application is so good that they won't even care about my grades. And so I think it's so important because you can be discouraged like if you don't pass an exam, and life goes on even when you're in vet school, right? So some of the students I've spoken to, their family member got really sick like a week before exams. And you're just so worried you can't study, and then you have to do it on this computer thing. You have no idea what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to like not look around, and then it buzzes that you looked around or whatever. So stressful. right? Other things can happen. You can learn that you have a learning disability during vet school. There's so many things that can happen to you, and it's not because you don't deserve to pass the exam, or you don't deserve to get into vet school, or you don't deserve to get a residency. It's just, you will get it if you really want it. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like, don't give up. Don't let anyone tell you that you can't do it, because you can if you want it. So that's kind of how I live. I never discourage students. If if your rotation you weren't the best student that week, well, it doesn't matter. Like, maybe things were going on. I don't know about what was going on in your life, and I'm always here to help if you need help. But I think we all need to just be kind to each other, supportive, and ultimately, hopefully everyone will get your BVet Med, or if you're in the States, your DVM. That's what they always said. It doesn't matter if you're last in your class. If you pass, you all get the same degree, right? So you just have to help each other, make sure everybody in your class graduates together, and you all become vets. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, and I think one like underlying theme that in both of your philosophies is like believing in yourself, because it's like it's very easy to let one failure knock you down, knock your confidence, or like, oh, I didn't do so well in this unit of a test. Like, it's very easy to get very worked up in your head, like, oh, I don't deserve to be here, I'm not good enough. And I think those feelings are definitely amplified being like a BAME student. You're like, oh, I'm sure like so many people say like, oh, you only got in to like fill a quota because they wanted to showcase diversity, and like negating from your actual achievement of like getting in or like your personal worth. So I think there's like an added element of like that sort of stress that people don't really talk about, but also just in general, like being your own worst critic. Like, it's very easy to be like, oh, I'm terrible. Like I when I finished my exams this summer, I was like, oh my God, I didn't know anything. I couldn't do it. It was horrible. And then like with the results, I was like, no, I can do this. I don't know. I just feel like sometimes having someone tell you that like they believe in you and like you can do it, like as what you guys have said, like with your helping rotation students, I think is really helpful. And also just being compassionate, because everyone could be struggling with something that you don't know. So I think those two are really nice philosophies. Oh, well, thank you so much for joining me and having this like really, I think this is a really nice conversation. And I think it's hopefully people listening have enjoyed it too. But I think for me, it was I don't know, it just kind of feels like inspiring. I just feel like a wave of like, inspiration over
Us
me.
too.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for being here, and I wish you the best of luck with your residencies, exams, and all the stuff that you've got going on in your life.
You too, and thanks so much for having us. It's been super fun.
Yeah, it's been really fun, really nice. Thank you.
Bye. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. I think it was really insightful hearing their journey through internships and residencies and their quotes for persisting against adversity. Having visibility at a level of teaching is so important. People often use the quote, seeing is believing, and by having inspirational staff members like these guests, it shows current and prospective students that they can reach any level with hard work and resilience. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the Animal Aspirations podcast, and we'll see you next time.